on this topic, inaudible, invisible, and practical movements, what you don't see or hear in the Coptic Orthodox liturgy, okay? Or a talk on Archdeacon and Habib Girgis, which I started but I didn't finish, or a talk on a book called Families and Faith, which is basically talking about how the faith is transmitted from generation to generation. So like it covers a span of I think 40 years, and it has a group called G1 to G4, and it talks about like how the grandparents transmitted the faith to their kids, and their kids transmitted the faith to their kids, and it kind of goes through all of that. So those are three options. So who's for option one? Anyone?
What was the second one again?
Second one was Habib Girgis. And the third one was faith and families, like how the faith is transmitted.
No, the first one.
Option one?
Yeah.
Option two? Option three?
Wait, what?
Do you need to make an actual
Option three is faith and families.
It's
one of your sayings.
I've never.
So option, it's between option one and three. One?
No.
Show me by show of hands for option one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
No.
7 for option one. Option 3, which is faith and families. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
You can't pick 3. You can't have a vote. No, he doesn't count.
I am a human being.
What'd you say, Antony? What about them? About men? No. Hard pass. Equality for women.
After he pulled up PowerPoint and the concept of intersection.
Not really. In the eye. My eye? It's not equal. There we go. Respect, that was really good. That was good.
Both of you are such generous.
So we'll do this part. You guys want this one?
Yes.
This is what you chose. This is what the majority chose.
I didn't choose this.
It doesn't matter, we won. Option 3 wins.
Alright, option 3
We're
wins.
winners, not losers.
Wow, okay. My wife.
Alright, if you want to see the slides, I recommend you kind of shift to the side. If you don't care about the slides, then just stay where you are. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So this is a very important book that I read during the course of my studies as I'm preparing for a course called Religious Education. Religious education is a very broad topic. One of the angles that usually gets hit when you study religious education is the idea of like families and how family life has a big part and role in the education of the children in the faith, growing up in the faith. So we call it religious transmission. That's what it's called. And basically it's the idea of how the faith gets transmitted and passed on, right? You know how we say in the liturgy, from generation to generation, right? It's this idea that the faith has been handed to us and that we've received it, and it is our responsibility to also pass it on, right? It's the basic idea of how the faith gets transmitted from generation to generation, and what gets retained and what gets lost and why, and that whole idea. So I'm gonna focus on one chapter because obviously the book is so big, which is chapter 4. It's called The Importance of Parental Piety and the Distant Dad. Now, a lot of us are not at that phase in our life where we're married and have kids, but some of us are. But keep this in your mind. A lot of times we hear talks on marriage, but we don't hear talks on parenting, right? So a lot of times we hear talks on, when you get married, and we hear the marriage talks, but this is a little bit more advanced, and I think it's also important for you to hear it from now. Like, it may seem a little too early, but it's never too early. It's important to understand that marriage results in having kids. All right. So, right? You're going to be pleasantly surprised that it quickly becomes about kids, and you get past the idea of the honeymoon phase and the romantic period. That continues, but it takes on a different form, right? Okay. I know from my personal experience, but Uncle Samir has way more. And some of you guys are about to get married, and God willing, the rest of you follow in that direction. Come talk to me if you're, come talk to me if you're looking for a partner. or talk to Lily. So, I want to start with the first bullet. The first emotional bonds we form are with our parents. By the way, all these are quotes from the book, so I'm going to give you the quote, and then I'm going to expand the quote. So, the first emotional bonds we form are with our parents. And the nature of these bonds influences us throughout our lives. So basically, the first connections we make as human beings are with our parents. And so, I don't know if you've seen this before or not, but when the baby is born, the first thing they do is they make sure the mother actually does skin to skin. And there's also a scientific trend also that the father should do the same thing, where there's a skin-to-skin contact from the beginning, from very early on, so that the baby has this very close connection and bond with the parent. It goes as far as physical touch. It's not just like information, it's also this feeling of connection, protection, just safety, right? The baby was in the womb for so long, so it wants to feel safe and secure and all of that. So, that's number one. Number two, parents are linked to their children's first conceptions of God. So we talked about the physical, now we're kind of moving on to the spiritual here. The first experience of God that a child will have is through their parents. Not the church, not Abuna, not a friend, not Giddu, not Teta, not some stranger. It's going to be your relationship with God that you transmit to the kid. If your relationship with God is whatever, the kid is going to have a whatever. Most likely first experience of God as whatever. Like, if it's strong, you're obviously going to pass that on. Give you a small example. And you may think it's simple, but some people do it. Like something as simple as kissing the icon. I'm not tooting my trumpet. I'm just saying, like for me and Lillian, like Amelia knows how to kiss icons. She knew how to do that at the age of 3 months. All right? That's because we taught her from a very young age to do that. It's so funny. She sees a picture of Lillian on the wall and she does the same thing. It's all good. They'll learn later. But the idea is that they're picking up these things because we're showing them how to do it. Now, if you go into a less religious family, like what's an icon? They may not even have an icon. Do you get what I'm saying? They're not even aware of what an icon is, and who cares to touch it and kiss it? Like, what's that? What's the point? They don't know. So there's differences in the upbringing from a very early age. Now, the third thing, sociologists and psychologists use the term socialization to refer to the process parents and other adults impart to their children, preparing them for adulthood. So this idea of socialization is basically that it takes a village to raise a kid. That's just a fancy word for that. Idea that it takes a village to raise a kid. And now, a lot of times when children grow and they get more and more devious and shaqi and mischievous and all this stuff, we usually ask, where is this coming from? Is it the parents? Is it the friends? Is it a few things? Is it TV? Is it school? Like you're trying to identify the source of the problem. But in reality, kids are picking things up from many places. You can't really put your finger on it, right? That's for positive and negative things. So like say a kid knows something like the Lord's Prayer. Well, he knows the Lord's Prayer because he picked it up at home, but it was also reinforced in church. You get it? So it takes like a community for something good or bad to happen to someone. And that goes all the way up to young adulthood, by the way. A lot of times they'll say, well, Abuna, where were you? You're responsible. Well, no. Where's your parenting? Well, no. Show me his friends. Well, no. You know, it's way more than just putting your finger on one of the influences or people that transmit anything. There's a scholar named Bujamra. He uses the term socialization. I don't really need to get into that, but it's widely used, okay? Now, parenting and the transmission of faith. Parents are the key to the religious socialization. Religious organizations reinforce and amplify socialization by programs and activities. Those of you who serve Sunday school in the churches, they know that. Don't you do activities and trips and homework assignments and like memorization competitions? Don't we do all these things for little kids? All of that kind of stuff, the curriculum or the activities or the program, are all trying to do this work of socialization, which is to raise the kid in the fear of God and to understand who God is. So for parents, the child's acceptance or rejection of the religious faith is a source of joy or sadness. And you all know this. If you grew up in Egyptian households, you know when if you stray from God, your parents are depressed. You know what I'm talking about? Abuna, my daughter, my son, they don't come to church. Call him, visit him, like do anything, like cry, like give them your kid to babysit so that they anything, right? They're so depressed because they know their kids, their biological kids, are not close to God, so it brings great sorrow to their heart. Now, the opposite is true. When your kid is very committed to church, loves God, does all the things that a good Christian should do, and is polite and has morality and ethics and all the good stuff, they're happy. They're like, okay, thank God, we didn't do such a bad job, right? You kind of hear that. All right, so what goes around comes around. You gave your parents a hard time. I pray to God that you don't have that happen to you, because you will have kids, right, one day, and you're going to realize how much of a pain you were to your parents, right? We all always say that. It's like karma, I really don't wish that upon you. But
What about the parents that are like, oh, like my kid spends too much time in church, like I need them to focus on like their. Yo, I'm just saying, like maybe you get like a.
of course, extremes are not good. Of course, they're not good, and there's definitely something to say about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, you
what
definitely.
Especially if he's not doing good in school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if your kid is like, yo, why are you laughing? This is mad real.
That means they're
So-
not spending time in church, they're just saying.
No, they are spending time. Like, do you know what I mean though?
Yes. So there's this idea that a kid could have where they're good at serving other people, but not serving their own household.
Right.
So like it goes against the law of service, which is Jerusalem, Samaria, and to the ends of the world. You cannot go after service and you're not serving your immediate circle. That is a huge problem. So young people need to learn that very early on. And a lot of parents do actually tell their kid, like, how are you serving Sunday school and you can't clean up your room?
Yeah.
Like, it is a problem. It is a big problem. And you should really consider what she brought up there. And a lot of us are actually in that phase of our life too.
But how do we teach kids to like balance?
So they have to balance, right? So if it's not even brought up, then they're completely unaware. So it has to be brought up by maybe servants prep teachers. Like the servant prep teachers should make that very clear early on. Hey, you're going to serve Sunday school, but listen, a prerequisite to that is that you're like okay in these areas at home. So that's something I would say servants prep or pre-servants should make like serious note of and really address that. That's how I think it should be done, and also it should be reiterated a few other times as you're serving. That's how I think. Does anyone else have a different approach?
Maybe the person should ask himself why he's doing that.
Okay.
Why he's giving more time and service to outsiders than insiders. Maybe there is an egoistic way of thinking, and I want to show everyone that I'm a good person. I don't care about the house, and I don't care about my reputation in the house, but I do care about my reputation in church, so I'm trying to be extra nice and more involved and I think that's a big problem.
You touch on something that's so true. Sometimes we have parents that come to us and say, yeah, my son or daughter, they're an angel in church. At home, they're the most aggressive, violent people in the world. So image is very important, especially to this generation. We're very good at masking and covering the real stuff. And we do come across that a lot. So you do need to ask yourself some hard questions. Like, all right, I'm serving, but like, what's my life look like at home? You know, is it consistent? Do I have a double life? Am I two-faced? You know, it's a good point. Good point. So what promotes or hinders religious transmission or socialization? So there's no developed theory based on explanations, based on social science data, but there is this book that I mentioned that did a study from 1970 to 2005, a span of 35 years, which is valuable information. Because what they did here is they surveyed, interviewed, and questioned 4 generations: G1, G2, G3, G4. G standing for generation 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what they did here was they observed the parental behaviors and things like role modeling and their idea of consistency. So this idea that the parent practices what they preach. And they ask kids, did your parents live this out, or were they hypocrites? And so modeling, role modeling, and the idea of consistency. Were your parents actually consistent? Were your parents on the same page? Or was one parent the lenient one and the other one the hard and, difficult one? And you see a lot of homes that are like that. Mom is soft, dad is hard. Or the opposite. You need to be on the same page, because if you're not, the kid knows how to navigate that very well. So when they need something, they go to the easier one. When they want someone to defend them or be just, they go to the more firm and strong one. So keep that in mind when you're choosing a partner, that you guys are on the same page about your parenting style. I know that sounds crazy. A lot of people say, how many kids do you want? Who cares how many kids you have? God will give you what you get, But more important question is, what kind of parenting styles are we going to have? All right? No, I can't have 4. I only want 1. No, who cares? It's whatever happens. You'll find that it doesn't work that way anyway. Those who want kids don't get them, and those who want them don't have them. Like people who want kids don't get them, and people who, trust me, this is life. You'll see it.
Yeah, what you want to get.
Huh?
That's right.
It is life.
Yeah.
It's true. All right, third idea. The theory is parental behavior, such as role modeling and consistency. I mentioned that. 4th thing, if parents are not themselves, if the parents are not involved in the religious activities, if their actions are not consistent with what they preach, children are rarely motivated to follow their parents. A parent can't say, go to church, go serve, and then they're at home watching the liturgy on CTV. Because that's for me and this is for you. It can't be like that. You can't order your kid. You can't want your kid to do something that you yourself don't do.
Doesn't do it, yeah.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a group of people, but some of them were converts to do with about church, and the question came up was when we, in the future have kids in these future generations, what works for us may not necessarily work for them in terms of maybe what the church is doing. So, for example, the simplest, most superficial thing is language, right? Arabic works for most of our parents, doesn't necessarily work for all of us here. So that's something the church would have to accommodate. But outside of language or something like that, what do we have to keep in mind as servants that we should be implementing for future generations to make sure, both as parents and as servants, to make sure we can retain people?
All right, so you bring up a good point about culture gaps. Obviously, our generational transmission is a tricky one. Why? Because most of our parents came from Egypt.
Yeah.
All right, and so there's a culture gap. That gap is going to get tighter and tighter because now we were born here, so we're more familiar with so we have a little bit of the Egyptian culture, but we're still born and raised here. So your child is going to have an easier time. You still may have some Egyptian tendencies or things that you picked up, but it would be much easier. But your kid is not going to get to a tita that came from Egypt or something like that. It's going to be such a big gap. So cultural things can be easily addressed if you're open-minded. And we kind of see that in the churches now. Like, we're in a very ethnic parish here. Like, there's a good understanding, I would say, between the socialization or the social hour, the fellowship hour, as a coffee hour. You know, you're not going to go to a church like that and they're going to be offering like fool and mulkhaya and like badunas and selling food and they're not going to do that. Tomorrow we're having a liturgy here. What are we going to have? We're most likely going to have bagels and orange juice, right? Something like that.
Because
right?
it's easier.
No,
Not that food.
because that's the preference. That's the preference.
No, I would rather.
Oh, really? See, there you go. You have some. But Karina, like your question is a valid question. So I personally think the generation before us thinks we're too liberal. And when you see your kids growing up, you're gonna be like, that kid's way too liberal. Like, I think what we're gonna end up seeing is like, oh, when I was their age, or when I was a kid, we never thought to do that. Look at these kids now. Okay, look at how bold they are at this and that. So it seems that like the religion is regressing, but it's also progressing in other areas where people are more educated about their faith. Our parents were not necessarily like searching or looking like we do. You know what I mean? So there's pros and cons, I would say. There's good and bad. I could talk more about that at another time, but it's a good question. Are parents as influential today as they were in the past? So there's a reference in the chapter 3 of this book that says high rates of parent-child resemblance in religiosity more than had been expected. So basically, to answer that question, the answer is no. Parents have the same influence they had in the past. The degree of intergenerational transmission does not appear to have decreased over the past 35 years. So with all these years of research, 35 years, they didn't find that parents' influence on their kids has decreased, which could be I would assume is surprising to you, right? You would think, some people may think parents are having less and less control or influence on their kids. Who would have thought that? I mean, I think I would have easily assumed that if I didn't see this slide. I probably would have said we're regressing. You know, everything's so liberal these days. Kids, they could choose their gender. Like, all right. Anyway.
But is the question, do parents still have the same influence, or are parents, or is religiosity getting watered down? Like, because I think my kid's religion could be more watered down than mine, and therefore I still have the same influence, it's just not the same level of religiosity.
Yeah, I actually gave a couple people something called orthopraxy, a sheet which basically describes how that belief is practiced. So you're right, the religious intensity and piety can go down, for sure. But I don't think there's a correlation between the influence, maybe in some cases, the influence of a parent and their child's piety. Like, I'll give you an example. Sometimes we hear our parents say like, oh, you should have seen how your grandma used to pray. And like, it like sticks in their head so much that they try to like imitate that later on in life. Like, I think piety does make its way down. Like, I even do things that I remember as a child because it's just good memories, good thoughts, you know? Even though it may not be at the same intensity, but I do it as almost like a memorial, a remembrance, a reliving of something. It's more than just the religion, it's also that action or memory. But that's a good question. I would like to explore it more.
Could you say it in like a more simplified way?
The question or the answer?
I'm sorry, I got lost somewhere, like, in the piety.
Like piety, popular piety, like
Yeah.
something like piety as in like, for example, Orthodox people are great at piety, where they like have something called popular piety.
سامحني.
Yeah, like things like they'll go to a procession of a saint,
Yeah.
but they won't go to the liturgy. Or they'll stand in front of an icon of Saint George and like beg Saint George, and then like they forget Jesus is on the altar. Like that's popular piety.
Oh, okay.
Or checking, for example, ingredients of the orange juice, you find that there is معرفش ايه فطاري, and they have nothing to do with the church.
Yeah, one time I was in a liturgy praying as a priest,
Yeah.
and someone entered the church and they were standing in front of one icon of a saint for like 30 minutes. I'm like, you should do this in front of the altar, not in front of them.
Yeah, but
You
that
know,
can
it's-
also have a good effect on
Yes and no.
younger children, because you can also model, like, let's say that popular piety thing, right? I can model myself how to be like actually pious instead of like modeling myself to be this way from church. And even if your parents, like, let's say, aren't very religious,
So-
you would want to, like, even just being in church one time, you could be like, wow, like, this is what I want for my life.
I'll tell you something. There's a joke Protestant people make of Orthodox people. They say, you kiss the Bible more than you read it. Okay? We kiss the Bible more than we open it and read it. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's like the best way to put it. Like you're missing the point. It's not
Superficial.
It's very like, yeah, you have a lot of reverence and respect for something. Like you could take the Bible and put it over your head or put it on the top shelf and you do all this like weird stuff, but you never open it. It's superstitious in a way. So
Can it have the
education,
reverse effect is what I'm saying?
like going from popular piety to a more like legit type of faith
Yeah,
where
like
you're
if-
opening.
Since we're all like, we live here, we've been educated here, right? So if I see, let's say, my mom doesn't do this, but let's say I see my mom like kissing the Bible every day, but she doesn't ever open it, right? I'd be like, that seems silly. Like, don't you want to know what's inside? So being like a intelligent person, I'd be like, okay, like now I want to open it, and then from there, like, doesn't that just snowball? So it could have the reverse effect too.
I think it can go both ways.
Yeah.
You can take the same habit as your mom, or you can do whatever you said. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can say, no, I'm not gonna do that.
And that's what you're saying about parents not having influence anymore. But they could have, that is still it's still influential in its own way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is there are going to be things that we picked up that were wrong.
Yeah.
That is our responsibility to correct in
Right.
the next generation. All right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that stuff. And because we saw the wrong, right? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because we experienced something wrong. You know when you're like, oh, my parents did this wrong, I'm never going to do that. Like my dad used to yell all the time. I'm never going to yell at my kid. You know what I'm
You
talking
will
about?
yell.
Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how much.
That's what my mom says every time I say that.
Like, you know what I'm talking about when it comes to like a yeller? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I hated that, so I'm never gonna be that. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like maybe when it comes to religious things, like, yeah, my parents used to do this, but I'm never gonna be that. Like, I'm gonna take what happened to me and step it up. Or I'm gonna, like, teach my kid the truth. Like, that is a partial truth. It's not the full truth. Like,
that
yes,
okay?
I revere the Bible.
Like,
I
is that
revere
an
the
okay
Bible.
mentality?
I don't
to
throw
have?
that reverence out, but I say, let's go the second step and revere the Bible and then read the Bible.
But is that okay to think that way? Like, to think, like, I will do things differently? Like, that's not, I don't know, I guess there's a part of me that feels like that's, like, I don't know, maybe just 'cause, like, you're all about, like, respecting parents and stuff like that, so it feels judgy, like, you know? Like, maybe they do get something from what they're doing, you know what I mean? I'm sorry,
I'm not saying throw it out.
Yeah,
I'm saying build on it.
okay.
So
So it's okay to, like, think that way?
to think that the parents delivered something valuable and that it should be
To think that you
respected.
could do better, like,
But it's okay. I think that's fair. I don't think it's an arrogant thought to say that I'm gonna do a better job. It's not like your parents failed you. I think they did the best with what they had,
Yeah.
right? So you have to understand what you have is different. Think about it this way, like your financial situation. every parent hopes that their kids' financials will be better than yours, right? They're not gonna hold it against you that, oh, like, why does your savings account look better than mine? Well, no, because I invested much into you that, you know, you took a deposit from me, but you did something with it. You know what I mean? Your parents are not gonna get upset that you're progressing and that they came from somewhere. You would want the same for your kids. You would want better for your kids than what you had for yourself, right? It's just human nature. I think any human would want to see progress in their family generationally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's in all areas of life, spiritually, physically, financially, right? All right. So here's some charts and graphs. Don't be too overwhelmed by this. But what this basically is saying is there are 4 dimensions to religiosity. This is your question. This thing, right? So there's the dark bar, the black one, and the off-white bar. And basically what this is saying is those who are close, because black stands for close to their parents, have a better chance. So there is a correlation between your closeness to your parents and your religious intensity. If the closeness is not there, there's a negative trend on that. You get what I'm saying? So what that's saying is if your parents are religiously intense, meaning like they fast Wednesday, Friday, they go to liturgy, Sunday, they repent and confess. Their religious intensity is high, and you're close to that parent. The likelihood of you doing that is almost double than you being far from it or distant from it. And it goes. That is the case in all of the dimensions. So your closeness to your kid does this in all areas of.
It's not close to the parents.
Yeah.
The parents don't
Basically, if you're far from your kids, it has a negative, impact. That's what that's showing over the 35 years of data that was collected. Yeah.
So in the inverse culture, so let's say the parent is not close to their religion, and they have a close relationship with their child.
Yeah. It means that their kid is gonna do that same thing.
طبعا احنا we're saying very generally يا ابونا, there are always exceptions.
Of course.
Yeah.
But if the parents don't go liturgy, don't do anything, they will come the same. They will be the same.
And no, like Uncle Samir said right now, there are exceptions. There's 100% exceptions where there are people that don't have good families and their kids turn out saints.
No, it's good family, but they don't do liturgy every time. They don't do.
And I've seen the opposite too. I've seen parents that are saints and their kids are devils. Absolutely. I've seen the opposite too. Right?
I've never seen that.
PK.
Yeah, PKs, classic. But that has to do with the distant dad which we're going to talk about.
Yeah, like
All right. Are we okay to move on? Do you guys want to keep going or?
Yeah, I love the conversation.
All right. So you know when they say the stakes are high? You know that expression, the stakes are high? It's usually used when it's like a business deal, transaction, money, investments. The stakes are high, right? There is something called the intergenerational stake theory. Parents expend huge amounts of time, energy, money, and love in raising a child. Consequently, they are highly invested in the relationship and are more inclined to see continuity and cohesion. They have a high stake in the next generation.
Who's that?
That's the author of the book.
Oh.
So I think we should think of it that way. I mean, for those of you who are into things like that, I know some of you are into that, but you're investing so much, right? So you'd expect a return. Not that you're like doing it for yourself, but you want to see results. You hope that you've put so much into raising a kid that you hope to God that there's some fruit. All right, transmission across religious groups. So basically what this did was it even examined different religious groups like Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Mormons, and a group or a demographic called the nuns, N-O-N-E, which means people that don't associate with any faith. All right? So it's still consistent on this graph that if you're Jewish, Catholic, Christian, Mormon, a nun, whatever, your closeness to your parents still breaks through all those religious ideas. So like, it's consistent across religions. So it's not like only in the Christian families is this idea that if you're close to your parents that it's going to influence you. No, it's across the board. All right, you get that?
What is this measuring? What's on the axis?
So it's a percentage. So those who are close, it's the same idea. Like the dark color is those kids that are parents and kids that are close to each other versus those who are not close, parents and kids that are not close to each
But it's not clear what about them.
other. About their religious, like this is just showing religious diversity.
But I thought
Like-
in the nun, they don't have any religious affiliation.
So yeah, so even
Maybe
for
the
families,
difference is very small here.
yeah. No, but even for families that don't have a faith, they're very influential. So
So
they'll
the
follow similar habits and they'll have a lot of similarities.
So the percentage on the left is measuring their similarities?
It's measuring, yeah, a
It
higher,
says religious tradition.
higher,
If you read-
higher chance of that, like influence, like higher numbers in like similarity.
But the thing is, you have a control group, like you have the nun, and all of them respond the same way, so,
What do you mean?
It's not an experiment, there's no control.
I mean, they have but they include a kind of counterfactual, so the nun, like, there is a trend in the nun, so what is
Well, what
this
is-
Tony, read
explaining?
the title of the graph.
I think it's just like how close the parent and child are, and then based on religion.
So,
So you have the religions right there, and then that is how close they are to the parent. That's what they're comparing.
so it's pretty much
Oh,
the same
so
as
the nun,
It's not that makes sense.
It's not measuring how close they are.
I said it differently.
You
but-
are close to your parents.
Sorry, sometimes, that's why I was not
Okay, I understand.
I'm not a business analyst.
That's fine.
That's what I said, the last group, which are probably the nuns, the difference is very
So
small
they end up
between,
being, okay.
between those who are close and those who are not close in their religious.
So atheists have better relationship with their kids than,
No, that's not what this.
that's what Sophia said.
They could though, you don't know.
The gap
No, there is
close.
something here that's important. If you pay attention, Jewish and Mormons, they are more on the conservative end of the spectrum when it comes to religiosity, okay? So that has obviously a bigger impact. You see that? There's higher numbers here,
Yeah,
right?
there's a huge difference.
So there's a difference there.
I still don't get it. Sorry, but what is that? I don't get that part about the Mormons.
I'm gonna explain that because basically more conservative religious groups
Yeah,
have sometimes a more
so a
greater
closer bond to their
success.
kids, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. Okay, I got it.
More closeness. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Alright. Sorry, guys. Alright, gender differences. I don't need to get into all of this, but basically, it's very important to look at mother-child and father-child relationships. Now, I have a question for you. Who's more influential? A mother or a father?
Mother.
Yes.
Father. Now, this is
Talking about
not...
God the Father or the Father?
There's a whole chapter in this book called The Distant Dad. There's a crazy amount of information on this idea of the dad, the MIA, the missing dad, having such a negative effect on the kids. All right, so the idea of the distant dad is it's a real thing.
David added something that I don't know if that's correct. It depends on the gender of the kids. So maybe the
So dad,
boy will be
daughter.
more affected. I don't know if that's true.
It usually does.
I think
usually
that
does
yeah,
cross
like the
that.
girl will be more influenced by her dad and
By her missed dad?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But there's a lot of information on how the dad overall.
Depending on their level of.
All right, I'll keep going. Mother-child relationships. So for Jews, mother-children relationships appear considerably more important than father-child relationships for passing on religious tradition. So this is an exception. This is an exception in the Jewish community. So mothers in the Jewish community tend to have more of an impact on their kids than other faith traditions. So what do you think, I have a question, what do you think it would look like for Orthodox Christians? A lot of times Orthodox Christianity is compared with Judaism because of the similarities in the conservative approaches to how to live life. So I would say for us, yeah, moms are very influential, but the distant dad does also impact us very much. Yeah.
I don't know if it's, I think because when it comes to like the Judaism, I think it's because Judaism affects the culture so much, but Orthodox Christianity is kind of separate from the culture or exists in many, many different cultures, that the whole distant dad relationship or effect is a product of the culture. And that the Jewish culture just depends so much on the mother, and the mother being like relating everything to the child. So that might be the difference of what that might be.
Yeah, so the culture is much bigger in Judaism, right? Is that what you...
The culture emphasizes the mother more in their relationship with their child, whereas our, like the Western culture is a little bit different.
I also have a comment because I think we're looking at all these charts and we're saying it like it's a good thing. Like it's a good thing that in this religion or in this whatever, that if the parent is close to this religion, then the child is going to be close to the religion as well. But oftentimes the reasons why that's the case are negative. That's a different topic.
So you're saying it's almost like a forced thing?
Like
they
for
imposed it on the
example,
kids?
I don't know, like in Coptic Orthodox history, like a lot of our, like why are so many people certain professions? Because the parents like try to tell the kids like I want you to do this, I want you to do
Which means they influence them.
It influences, right? But it isn't necessarily like an influence to like that's negative or I don't know, like I'm getting into weird territory, but like the opposite. But like it's it's like you don't really like we don't really know. Like I mean we're saying it like it's a positive thing because it's like
I'm sorry. I don't know that we're saying that. I think we're just pointing out how influential parent relationships are. And in what ways, that's what I was getting at.
That is basically what this is about. So, but I do get your idea. Also, like, you know, there are going to be outliers. There are going to be people that don't get influenced. There are going to be people that don't want to have any association with anything Coptic. And their parents could be super pious. I've seen it. Samir just said it, you know. Priest kids tend to be very far from church. And that has a lot to do with Abuna being distant from their kid family. There is truth to this stuff. And I think it does apply to us. So I'll keep going. I'm just going to skip these charts because this is where I'm going to end. There's 4. Oh yeah, you have a question? Yeah.
So what if you're doing everything right and you're like, you know, praying and like going to church and all that, and your kid is not?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do then?
So you know the story of Saint Monica and Saint Augustine? She was a saint. Saint Monica, in the history of the church, is known as a saintly, pious mother. Her son, Augustine, you know the story of Augustine, or Augustine, he became a pretty bad person, okay? And the story talks about how she tried to bring him back so many times and tried to tell him to repent. She did everything as much as she could. But the story of St. Augustine goes like this. It basically gets to a point where it describes it as, you know, the mother of such tears will not be unnoticed or something like that. And it was a way of the story being told because the mother's prayers and intercessions on her son's behalf somehow, you know, came through. But that's not always going to happen. So you could do everything right and still not have kids that are saintly. And we have experience of that.
So how do you create that balance of like being close with your kids and like getting them to do it, but not like making them feel like they're forced?
So yeah, that's a thing. Like I've seen very tight parenting, and I'm gonna get into this. I've seen very tight parenting styles which makes the kid explode when they get to college. No, you can't go out. No, you can't talk to her. No, you can't look at this. No, you can't go there. No, you can't do that. Everything's no, 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 no. They get to experience some freedom, and what happens? Explosion. So it's a parenting style that can cause the kid or the young adult to do the opposite. And I've seen it with my own friends. I have friends that unfortunately went through that. Their parents were super tight on them. They were like holding them from the neck their whole life. They started to dorm, everything went out the window. It was their moment of freedom. They took it. They did the opposite of everything because their parents were not wise and balanced. You know what I mean? So it's a parenting style thing that I think, if you're paranoid, it's a problem. I know that's hard to hear. If you're paranoid of something, that's a problem. If something doesn't exist, don't make it exist. Like, a lot of people are paranoid of stuff. Like, I just maybe touch on things like, you know, sexuality is a big thing. I could see our generation really struggling with our kids' sexuality. Like, did you do this? Did you do that? Are you a boy? Are you a girl? Like, you're like testing it out. Like, what do you identify as? Like, I think that's what we would be paranoid. I'm serious,
Really?
right? I think some of us that have more like religious piety and like the idea of like, you know, maybe.
So what you're saying is don't have kids.
No, I'm not saying that.
Don't have gay kids.
I'm saying that when you have a kid, you're going to be
That's not
concerned.
the message.
You're going to be concerned about their.
That's the plan for life.
No, because I just feel like there's so many things. Like,
There is so many things.
Like it's scary. I don't want
It's
to.
very scary. I know a lot of parents that are homeschooling, people that are trying to like protect their kids. I've seen a lot of things being done. I'm a priest. I hear a lot of things from kids themselves,
And you're a parent.
and I'm a parent. So I don't want to scandalize you, but things are happening. Crazy things are happening.
What is this?
Crazy things are happening. I want to end with this. The idea of 4 types of parenting styles. So the first one is the warm, affirming parenting perceived by the adult as a consistently close. Warm, affirming parenting perceived by the adult child as a consistently close relationship with one or usually both parents.
Did you mean for us to see it? Because we can't see it on the screen.
Oh, what happened?
I don't know.
So, did that just disappear?
Like 5 minutes ago.
Really?
It's not wasn't that good.
Oh, no.
So there's four parenting styles. I'm just gonna quickly review those and I'm done. The first one is warm, affirming parenting, perceived by the adult child as consistently close relationship with one or usually both parents. 2, the cold, distant, or authoritarian parenting style. The third parenting style, ambivalent or mixed message parenting, when either parent is perceived as sometimes aware or sometimes cold, or where one parent is perceived as warm and the other parent is cold or distant. And then the fourth parenting style is strained or preoccupied parenting, as when parents are distracted by marital, financial, health, or substance abuse problems. So the book goes into interviews on each parenting style with real families and real stories of like, oh, my dad wasn't there, or oh, my parents were there, but they were warm and gentle and loving. The whole point of this is that number one is what you want to do. Okay, number one is the style you want to have. All right? I'm not telling you how to do it, but the research shows that parenting style number one is the most successful way of parenting. Now, it's your choice what you want to do. You could be cold, distant, authoritarian. You could be mixed message parenting. You could be, and by the way, I think that's what a lot of us may struggle with. I think a lot of you will get into relationships where you guys are on the different page. I already know that. I'm going to tell you that I've seen very traditional people marry very like liberal people, and then they're just never on the same page. Mom thinks you could do this. Dad's like, heck no, you're not doing that. And the kid is confused as heck. I'm just saying, think 3 or 4 times before you marry someone that is not like-minded in your parenting approach. All right? That's all I have for you, basically.
And that's something you know beforehand, right?
Yeah, you should definitely talk about that.
Like, what's the question that you ask? What kind of parent are you gonna be? Like,
Yeah, like throw some examples and scenarios and like what would you do? Like,
okay.
yeah, you have to do that.
What's the difference between like balanced and mixed signal?
Balance and mixed
I
signal.
mean, like if you have 2 parents that are kind of like different, and then one of them or both of them have like disagree with each other in a sense. I think I'm answering my own question.
That was easy.
That's the best thing that happened.
This was mildly overwhelming.
Conflict resolution is very important in relationships in general. If you don't know how to resolve conflicts and how you get through things, then you're not
Don't get
gonna.
married.
Huh?
Don't get married.
Don't get married.
Facts.
I've seen a lot of marriages go sour simply because they can't solve problems.
If you don't know how to solve problems, don't get married to that person.
Yeah.
I have a question. What's the difference between the first parents' style? How does that? It's not gonna be like spoiling the kid, because that can go wrong. You can be extra on all this stuff, when that you're spoiling your kid to the point that he's really used to really get everything,
Yeah.
and not give any.
All right, I'll give you an example. I read another book on parenting called Parenting Towards the Kingdom. And it's written by an Orthodox scholar in child psychology and family life. And he talks about his real life experience with his own kids. He has, I think, 8 kids. So he gives different stories of like how he raised his kids. So I'll give you an example. One of his daughters stood up on the dining room table. She was like, I think, 4 years old, so she knows that that's not allowed or correct. So he looked at her and he said, I think her name was Chloe. He said, Chloe, do we stand on the table? He like asked her a question. She's like, no. So why are you standing on the table? I just want to see what my siblings are doing over there. Oh, really? Okay. Did you know if you stand on the table, you could fall and get hurt? Yeah, but I want to, like, he's like talking to her. He's like really trying to understand his kid. That's warm, affirming, balanced parenting. Then she's like, no, but I don't want to go down. He's like, you know what's going to happen if you don't go down? I'm going to put you in timeout. That's warm, that's very firm, and balanced. But the parenting that a lot of us experience, all right, so that's what we grew up
Say
with.
that 5 times.
And I think it also has to do with consistent discipline. In a way, I think in most in most parenting, you don't discipline the child until a specific point. You just let them do whatever they want to do. You just let them do whatever they want, and then at one point, okay, now you're not supposed to do this. And I think.
So you're saying let the kid do whatever.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there has to be. I think number one, there has to be consistency. Where it says consistent, close relationship. There has to be consistency in what you say and what you do.
Of course.
You can't just let the child do whatever they want to do, and then at one point you see them do something wrong and say what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah, that's what that means. Yeah. So definitely have rules and keep them. If you have rules and you don't keep them, then it means nothing. You just have rules, and the kid knows that rules are for breaking. But when you teach the kid very early on, there's consequences, and there's real consequences, they know that the rules are real. You know, they're not like just threats. Okay? I agree with that. Do you guys like this sort of stuff?
Yeah.
Because I have a whole bunch of things lined up like this. Because I really studied this in depth. I have tons of things on this. So I don't think it's premature to do it. I think it's actually, I wish I had this before I even got married, but I know it sounds like it's so far or so like in the future for you, but it's really important to have some vision or insight to that before you get there. It's called, I'll go back to the first slide. This is the book title, and that's how it looks. It's called Faith and Families and Faith. How religion is passed down across generations. Any other questions? One.
Is it possible to use this in the service with the kids?
Yeah.
Right?
100%. Good parenting will make its way to how we take care of kids. I actually thought of this in how we should be doing Sunday school. So you know the example of how I told you, like the kid was on the table? That is the way to do it.
But if
You know?
we do that with kindergarten and like we do that with pre-K kindergarten, that works perfectly. But when you get to like junior high school, for example, in high school, you can't talk to them like that.
Yeah, it changes, of course.
Yeah. So how do you approach them without insulting, and at the same time without
Which group? The
junior
older
high
kids?
school? Yeah. And at the same time, insulting not like verbally cursing, but at the same time like not hurting them, but at the same time being firm and without yelling. Because I feel like one thing that we do now on Fridays that servants are just very tired of yelling, and they, even if you yell, they listen, but at the same time, it's consistent as well as said, like, the yelling happens every week. So how do you approach them without having to yell?
Love is the solution.
No, love is there.
If you develop a personal relationship with the person, and the person knows that you love and he or she's gonna respect you without yelling. I think the problem that we as servants, we don't have time for relationship. We don't have time to develop this kind of relationship because it is time consuming. It's not easy, it's very difficult, and I know that. Lakin, I think that's the way to go.
But for the most part, I guarantee you that we have a relationship with them. Each servant knows them personally. We know
So
them.
you have a personal relationship with someone, and this someone still gives you hard time?
Yeah, when they're together, they influence each other. It's a behavior. It's a social behavior.
In my experience with 7th grade boys, the more you become friends with them,
Yeah.
they will love you, but they will not always respect you. They will walk all over you. If as soon as they see you as more of a friend than a Sunday school servant or an authority figure, they will walk all over you.
If you lose that line,
I don't know if
I think there's a wise balance. But I want to hear what Samuel's going to say, and then I'm going to answer, but I just want to hear what Samuel. All right, what's your guys? Just can we listen to this real quick?
Okay, so I think there are two situations that like I mainly deal with. The first one is where, like, since we're talking about junior high, you have kids that have been already corrupted and ones that have not been yet. So the ones that are like being protected from like going on the park on their own and like going to the library with their friends, like where they have supervision all the time, you feel they're still protected. They're not corrupt. Like if I tell them do that, they do it right away without questioning and like being pushy and all that. And then you have the other ones that their parents let them be, and they've lost respect for authority already. So for the ones that are like easy going, all you have to do is just guide them properly. Now there are differences in personality, of course. Like some people like to understand, some people will do it right away. They're so obedient. So I'm not denying that. Now for the ones that have been corrupted, like especially when it comes to authority, these ones you have to like dig deeper. Like for example, I was dealing with that kid. He's just giving me attitude for no reason. Like just when he knows I'm a servant, like I have to deal with him. He has that mentality. I have to give him attitude, and you just have to guide him through the process. Like show him why hard work, why doing what's right is important. And like for example, I have this girl. She's like giving me a hard time all the time, and then we start talking about the idea of letting her be on her phone all the time is going to actually harm her. And I told her, what if I give you your phone all the time to be on? And then would that be a reward or a punishment? And then she was like, that would be a reward. And I told her, okay, here are the consequences of being on your phone all the time. So really, if I want to punish you, I would leave you on your phone, and then you're going to wind up like that in life. Now, if I try to discipline you, you're giving me a hard time, so I'm putting work into that, I'm putting effort into that. So I'm wasting my time and energy and effort to actually make you be that person. So I'm rewarding you by doing that for you.
Yeah.
So that was like a very like, case in point, I guess.
Okay. lots of ideas.
That should have been the topic.
Michael?
Ideally, I know when I was around that age, like junior high, high school, when I saw it, the most effective servants for me weren't the ones that like kind of talked down at me, or like they didn't act like a parent or like an authority figure. They kind of like brought themselves down to our level. They kind of treat us like younger brothers and younger sisters. So I think that's kind of like, at least the way I see it, like ideally, like a servant who deals with that age group, you kind of have to, like, to an extent, of course, like bring yourself to their level, so they don't look at you as like, oh, this guy who's like older and he has everything figured out and like he's like the authority figure or whatever. Like you kind of have to humble yourself.
Brotherly approach versus an authority.
Yeah, like treat them like a sibling rather than like your child.
Yeah.
That to me is kind of like the best approach for that.
All right. I get what you guys are saying. I just want to say something about parenting. You know how I said if the mom and the dad are on the same page? So let's say you have 3 agreements. You know, this one's a softie, this one's harsh, and this one's whatever. Like 3 different things. They're not on the same page. So the people in the church know how to navigate the environment. Right? So that's a problem sometimes. Because there's people that are clever like that. There's people that are clever. They know how to get what they want. If you want this, you go to Abuna Antony. If you want that, you go to Abuna so-and-so. If you want this, you go to this circle. If you want that, like, you kind of know what's available to you, you know how to navigate it, and you make your way. Now, if we're on the same page, right, and we all agree, hey, we're all going to do it this way, so we're not going to get played around with. We're not going to be taken advantage of. Not in like a bad way. We can still be brotherly, but the idea is we're going to have a very brotherly, loving, warm way, and it's going to be consistent. All right? I think that's important. When it comes to Sunday school service, there has to be like a consistency. All right? I do also want to say that when it comes to, and this might sound like it's the opposite of what I just said, but there are going to be people that are going to be more influential. Your style will be more influential to certain people, and you will be able to reach a certain group of people with your style. You should not expect that your style is going to reach everyone. So we have to respect the preferences of the people as well. So like, as a servant, I need to be, like Samir and I, we're a team. We have one mind, right? But he has a different style. I shouldn't get upset if people are going to Samir, because we're a team, right? And he's not going to get upset if people are coming to me or seeking my counsel. Like there's the same boat. So Samir has his reach. I have my reach. He can't reach people that I'm reaching, and I can't reach people that you're reaching. It's simple. So we're not against each other. We complete each other. You get what I'm saying? So that exists in the church. That doesn't mean that this is one style and that's another one, and that they're not on the same page. No, we're on the same page, but there's a slightly different impression you give people that makes them more comfortable with you, or you would be more comfortable with me. If I'm a good servant, I'm going to be thankful that they go to Samir, that they're being served. That's the bottom line. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're not going to be all things to all people as much as you think you are, or you would like it to be. Right? I have accepted that as a priest. I know a lot of people will not be okay with me, and I'm okay with that. You get what I'm saying? That's going back to the idea of socialization, which it takes a village to raise a child. And I agree with you. Yes, certain homes are the reason for this kid's behavior. And it's a sneak peek into the home. Like, I don't even need to visit some homes. I know what goes on at home, just by how the kids behave. The other kid that's nice and quiet and obedient, you're like, this kid has certain style of being raised at home. It's just so clear.
Sorry, I have such a problem with this because I think we're now describing kids who are big personalities, who explore, who have friends, who can sometimes be troublemakers because they're children, as corrupt, and kids who don't question and sound like, like their spirits are broken and they just do what they're told, and they don't challenge you, and you don't want to spend time on them. as the good kids, and that might not be the case. Like they could just be, kids who are mellow. But I do think that you're signing up to be a servant. That means that you're signing up for not just the easy thing to do, and this kid is being a troublemaker, so they're wasting your time. It's what you've signed up for. You're a part of their parenting structure.
You take the good with the bad, I agree.
And it's actually good for you to sit down with them and explain to somebody why it's not very great to be on your phone all the time. Like you're teaching them something, you're not wasting your time. So I just don't like the description of kids who are troublemakers as corrupt. They're just
I didn't
being
mean
kids.
corrupt in that way.
Okay.
Yeah. We're using terms very broadly,
That's
loosely. But I agree, like, I don't think you guys are,
No,
you're
I
never saying
totally
that
agree with her.
You're agreeing
I'm
with
not
each other.
saying-
Maybe you just didn't like the word, but I agree, we have to be a little more watchful of that. But I do like your point. I do like your point, though, that we should be a little bit more, gentle, loving, caring. We have to have the right attitude, for sure. If we don't have the right attitude, it's not gonna work. All right, I think I took too much of your time. Thank you so much for the attention and getting really engaged. I think it's the first time I really felt a response from the
Yeah.
I think just the topic, it lended
It's a great
itself.